It is also the case that people of color also embody white habits. So keep that in mind for this paper. I also argue that this habit then influences the way people act in transaction with immigrants, and which in transaction, you kind of consider it as interaction, but I'll take it a little bit further than that. That being said, this transaction and this perception eventually leads to harmful political change and even terroristic violence, which we all witnessed with the El Paso shooting in 2019, the Buffalo shooting, and the shooting of the mosque, which killed the lives of 51 people. So these topics are pretty important to discuss, but I will try to do so in a lighthearted way, in an optimistic way in which we can all envision a better future. So I hold two premises to be true. I hold first that human nature is not inherent, and I hold second that human beings exist within a racialized and racist world. By my first premise, I'm invoking John Dewey's theory that there is no inherent human nature, or to say that if you are this person, these are the qualities you embody, or if you are this person, these are the qualities you embody. In his paper, Human Nature, he argues that there really is no essential human nature at all. We're all individual human beings, and in Tom Alexander's book, The Human Heroes, he discusses that the experience of life is inherently an aesthetic experience in which we create our meanings and our stories. So I hold these two to be true. By my second premise, I intend to invoke that within, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that the history of the U.S. is very problematic. I mean, we have a deep history of settler colonialism, as Michelle pointed out. We have a history of imperialism, as we are witnessing actively with the genocide of the Palestinian people. And we also have a deep history of white supremacy. I mean, it doesn't take that far to look at how relatively close the civil rights movement was, segregation, So I will not be debating these. If you ask me questions about this, I will tell you, refer to the first two premises. I hold these to be evidently true in order for my paper to actually work. What do I mean by Dewey's habits? So, as Jeremy was saying, it's a way of mode. We are our habits, but I also want to pose that habits is a disposition to action. So in a sense, when you acquire a habit, as Sullivan poses, it's a thing to celebrate because it is a new way of knowing and acting. It is learned, and in the sense that we acquire these things, right? So you can think of this as John Dewey does when he says that in The Human Nature and Conduct, he says that habit is sort of like will, in the sense that we learn to do things, and these things eventually guide our knowledge and our bodying of the habits that Sullivan will pose. It requires both our mind and body to work in unison to carry out habits, but I will hold that Dewey is anti-Cartesian, which I will get to relatively soon. A good way of considering habit is the habit of driving. As Sullivan poses, when I have acquired the habit of driving a car with the standard transmission, the knowledge provided by the habit composes my body. When I downshift the engine from fifth to fourth gear, my hand and arm know where to move the gear shift, so that I indeed shift into the fourth and not the second gear. Likewise, my feet and legs know how to operate the clutch and the accelerator pedal so that I neither peel out nor stall out when starting fourth and first gear. I do all of these things when driving, not by consciously calculating the distance between the fifth and fourth and second gear, nor by mentally judging the depth of the clutch relative to that of the accelerator. I cannot consciously think of the proper way of driving a standard transmission automobile as I have just done until my body knows how to do so. And this is from her excellent book, Living Across and Through Skins, which if you haven't, you should read it. It's really good. But in the context of habit, we can see how the habit of driving a standard transmission car dictates both your knowledge and the physical capability of carrying out this habit. If anyone here knows how to drive a transmission vehicle or a motorcycle by any chance, you understand that these things take practice. We have to repeat the motion. Someone has to teach you these things, whether it be nowadays YouTube or someone else who already knows how to do this will teach you how to do it. It requires vigilant and conscious attention to know exactly how to do things, whereas you need to learn how to go from going into neutral into first gear and having to hit the accelerator and turn with your, the shift gear and everything like that. But it also requires the physical capability of doing so, which means you need to have the physical capability of moving your arms and legs to do so. Now, this may sound ableist, but I also intend to talk about how there's preconditions to this. So habit isn't just for physically able people, but everyone has habits and the preconditions that will also influence these habits. So I'll get to that in a little bit. But this is essentially what habit is. It is a habit is the thing which dictates your knowledge and action, which you acquire through time and practice. Another way of considering habit is through language. As a Salvadoran American, a lot of times I will go back to our home country and we'll talk about driving standard transmission cars, right? So Over there, we don't say you're driving a standard transmission car, you say you are driving a standard, or you can say está manejando un estándar, right? So in this paper, one of the things I ran into, which is the issue, was having to actually differentiate in between the language. Where when I was writing this, I would say, yeah, you're driving standard, which American, and like in English, in America, that doesn't work. You don't drive standard, you drive a standard transmission car. Over there, since it's become a habit of mine to say that, it is the basic way I know about this. You drive a standard, right? It's the kind of intention and the idea. So, this is a picture of John Dewey. If you thought it was Dewey from Malcolm in the Middle, I'm sorry to burst your bubble. So, for Dewey, a big thing about transaction and habit is the actual organism and environment relationship. So, Dewey was heavily influenced by Darwin and thinking that we are, in constant relation with our environment. So, by organism, Dewey is referring to ourselves, and by environment, we can consider this as the society you reside in, or the cultural landscape that you're within. So as a Salvadoran American, I am within the Salvadoran American cultural environment where I have to transact with both equally. As myself, as an organism, I'm constantly in interaction with both. When we get to transaction, I'll talk about how these two influence each other, but in terms of habit, our habit guides both the way we conduct ourselves within the environment, and we also develop our habits in relation to the environment. So the culture you reside in will influence the habits you will acquire in the same way that the habits you acquire will also influence the environment, and I'll get to that at the end of my paper. So, conditions and habit, as I was talking about, I wanted to get to the fact that, this can come off as ableist, but there is the notion that conditions are essential to habit, right? So the society you reside in will automatically kind of give you the habits that you develop. Dewey explores this in an interesting way when he talks about alcoholism. So he says that a child who grows up in a house where there's alcoholics, the child may develop alcoholism, where the person that is an alcoholic does not drink whiskey because he has the disdain for water, which I found kind of quite interesting. For Dewey, you develop this habit of alcoholism because you're in constant relation with people that are alcoholics themselves. So you learn to operate within the world through this mode of navigation, where drinking becomes a habit, or, for example, bad posture can become a habit. But I will say that there are also preconditions to this. So it's important to note that while the condition of an alcoholic household may be essential for the habit formation, there is also the sense that there is alcoholic through genetics. So both alcoholic parents may pass down the genetics for a child to develop, let's say, an inattention towards alcohol. I forget the actual medical terminology, but there has been studies that show that if the parents are alcoholic, they will sometimes pass these things down genetically speaking. In terms of preconditions also, the body is essential for the habit formation. So for someone that is in a wheelchair, for someone that's neurodivergent, they will develop these habits around these conditions, right? So everyone essentially has habits, and as Sullivan, Jeremy, and Dewey both say, we are our habits. So conditions are essential, the environment is essential for the influence of our habits. And there's a relation between habits and customs. So there's a book called Habits of Racism by Helen and Go, which I'll talk about at the end, but she references Pierre Bourdieu's habitus. I don't know how to say that in French, but it's basically that idea that as a collective society, we all have the same habits. Dewey does this in a way that very shortcuts the whole idea, where he says that customs are basically widespread uniformities of habit. So a culture may develop a habit, say for example, a culture that is in a mountainous terrain. They will develop specific habits around navigating the mountain terrain, which over time they will pass down through family, through culture, or through close neighbors will become a custom. So that society will navigate the mountainous terrain in like fashion because they have to react to the environment in like fashion. The habit on a large scale then becomes a custom. You can think of language also as a custom. So as I was talking about, when I was writing this paper, talking about standard transmission cars, it became a difficulty because of the way that I talk about like the cars within my own family, my own culture. These things are passed down, right? So habits become customs through the widespread uniformity of habits, and these things are inherited through time and through culture. So, to make myself clear, habits kind of are like will, and customs are widespread uniformities of habit. Now, I want to take a little bit of time to talk about Shannon Sullivan's transactional bodies. Sullivan is influenced heavily by Dewey, and she writes that there are two important notions for transactional bodies, which she notes two notions are especially important to the understanding of bodies as transactional: the related concepts of body, mind, and organism, and the concept of habit. So by transaction, she is referencing Dewey, which means that there's an active and dynamic relationship between things, such as those two things are co-constitutive of each other. So when you think about habit and transactional bodies in an environment, if you think about, if you take yourself for an example, if you think really introspectively, most of the things we do, we tend to inherit from our family, from our parents, or from the culture we reside in. Whether we like it or not, oftentimes if you have a disdain for your family or parents, you will form these habits in opposite to them. So say, for example, one of your parents is an alcoholic, you will develop the habit of not drinking because you have a disdain for the trauma you went through. This in itself is transactional because you're not only developing a habit influenced by your environment, which is your family and cultural environment, but these things are also co-constituting the environment. So when your parents pass away, you reside and you have children, or other family members have children, there will be a custom of not drinking opposed to this, which will create a household which is non-alcoholic. Sullivan holds this as important because she writes that there is an important, aspect to talk about how not only the environment influences us, but the way that we influence the environment. So if you have a society that is composed of people that are racist, you will inevitably have a society that is racist and is unsafe for certain people. Let's talk further about mind-body dualism. Sullivan holds that Dewey rejects mind-body dualism, and so does Sullivan, in the sense that, I will talk about this actually in this next slide, which is perfect. Dewey and Sullivan both reject mind-body dualism because, as Sullivan says, Dewey holds that there is no mind-body dualism, but rather that the whole organism itself is composed of activity that is both mental and physical. So when she talks about exactly, this is the perfect example talking about a child interacting with fire. She says that an example of persisting organic activities body in a relationship with their meaningful qualities provided by Dewey may help make this abstraction of body-mind clearer. A child who has been burned may shrink from a flame, but she also may come to respond to a flame by playing with it and investigating it. For example, by poking sticks or paper into it. In the playful investigation of the fire, the organic act of avoiding being burned, shared by humans and other animals, continues. However, the child's activities involved with the flame can become more than the avoidance of being burned because of humans' abilities to develop meaningful accounts of it. Fire can come to mean a source of play or warmth and comfort when what the fire is changes through the attribution of meaning into the relationship fire and human. The relationship between fire and human has to be reconstituted such that the new consequences, other than just being burned, can emerge from their transaction. So Dewey, as a lifelong educator, placed a heavy emphasis on the experience of education. So when you think about the first time you interact with fire, you kind of already come to it, if you come to it alone, with the sense of curiosity. But if there's someone around you kind of dictating your actions, they're going to tell you, no, watch out, you might get hurt. Or in my own personal example, I almost burned down my house when I was 7, and the woman on the street stopped me because I was curious about it. It's just a natural tendency we all have, But to explore this, the mind and body both play an active role. These aren't separate existing things, but these are things that are both playing a role in activity. Sullivan poses, referencing to Dewey, the mind is kind of the context in which stores all meaning. So we can kind of think of our brain as like a bank of meanings and attributes we apply to things. And the body is the things that physically carry these things out. And these things work together. Right? So there's a mind here and there's a body over here, but rather these are together to compose the way we interact with the world and the habits we develop. So in the case of the child, they learn that one, the fire is a source of warmth, but also is a source of danger because they're able to store the meaning within their mind. They're able to have the experience of interacting with it. And through their physical capabilities, they're able to learn how to either cook with the fire or keep themselves warmth with the fire, etc., etc. Another thing that Sullivan talks about is that transactional bodies habit is essential to transactional bodies, but across another book, Sullivan discusses white habits, and she discusses this across her books, Revealing Whiteness and Good White People, which are both excellent reads if you haven't checked those out. White habits, to define it quickly, white habit is a habit that actively works to sustain white supremacy. So there's a distinction between a habit that Dewey proposes and the habits of white habits, which actively work to uphold white supremacy. And these white habits are habits that we embody. So these are things that we use in language, these are things that we use in perception, these are also things that we have in knowledge in terms of how we come to think that we know people or groups of people. Another thing that she poses is that because habit is transactional in a race and racist world, the psychosomatic self necessarily will be racially and racistly constituted. Race is not a veneer lacquered over a non-racial core. It composes the very bodily and psychical beings that human beings are and the particular ways by which humans engage the world. Now, as I was saying, this isn't just something that white people do. This is something that we all actively participate in. To use myself as an example, around 2022, I was pulled over by the police in Inglewood. So Inglewood PD, I'm not a big fan of those guys. Where me and my partner were almost killed by the police. We were pulled over at midnight, driving back to the dorms here actually. And the police, I was coming to my window, had his hand on his holster, and he was walking up to my door. And I'll reenact this, but let me drink some water first. Comes to my window like this, and I'm in my car, seated, trying to get my license. And to the police officer, this looks like a threat, which, if you know me, I don't mean any harm to anyone. So, police officer then proceeded to say, "Hey," and excuse my French, but what the fuck are you doing? And I said, "Oh, I'm trying to get my papers for you." And he said, I was visibly nervous at this point. My partner was in shock and in fear. And the police officer said, "Why are you nervous?" And I was like, "Well, dude, you're about to shoot me." And in a moment of trying to relieve myself through humor, the guy told me to get the fuck out of the car. I was then thrown against Mount Hood, which, looks like this. And in front of your girlfriend, that's not very pleasing to see at all. The police, I proceeded to be there for 30 minutes, and the police officer flipped my car over, left everything on the street, and at the end told me why I was pulled over. So let me remind you, I didn't get a reason why at first. He then told me, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" And I said, "No." And he said, "You didn't have a license plate on the back." And have a nice night. Drove off. Before that, he asked me if my girlfriend has a criminal record, and my girlfriend is a black woman who has no criminal record. And he asked me, and I said no. And he's like, "Are you sure?" And I said, he said, "Are you sure about that?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he was like, "Do you have anything illegal in the car?" And I was like, "Cigarettes." And I don't know if he wanted me to say that, admitted that I have drugs in the car, which I didn't at the time. But you can see that these are white habits. So he's coming to me assuming that I already am a threat, and his body's composing himself to be ready to engage and react to this threat that I am. But also, his habit dictates the way that he perceives me and my girlfriend as some people that are susceptible to crime or illegality. Similar to this, I myself have white habits because when I drive in affluent neighborhoods where there's heavy police presence, I change the way I drive in accordance to this to keep not only myself safe, but anyone that I'm with safe. Sullivan discusses this in a very unique way when she talks about ontological expansiveness as a white habit. So she holds that, for certain white people, they view the world, as the saying goes, as their oyster. So the world is open to inhabit it. I mean, we could think about this with colonialism, where Christopher Columbus from Italy, at the order of the King of Spain, said, "Find somewhere where we can live." And coming to the Americas, he thought he was coming to the West Indies. A modern example of this is the gentrification that's currently happening in Mexico City. So if you aren't aware, around COVID, when everyone had remote jobs, there became the term called digital nomads that became very popular, where people would move over anywhere to work from home with an American salary, but living in an economy of another country. Mexico City, they have a very, openly diverse